the digital world is growing to be effectively another level of government. So a lot of people think of government as sort of there's a federal government, there's a state government, there's a local government. They sort of understand those are all layers of government. I would say the digital platforms or the digital networks that we operate in effectively are another level of government.
You're thinking of building a company or already run a company that is not registered, but you want to get registered. I've looked at a lot of solutions, and one of the best ones in the market right now is Doula. I reached out to Arjun, who is actually the founder of Doula.com. I asked him if he'd like to work together on the podcast. He was like, of course. Doula is sort of a platform that helps founders and businesses form and manage US companies regardless of where they live. If someone is living in India, for example, and wants to start a company and get it registered in the US, he or she can do it by using Doula.com. Doula helps in forming the company. It can be an LLC, C Corp, or you name it. Doula offers a US address and a bank account to users, which can allow you to conduct business transactions that you can receive and send payments no matter where you live in the world from the United States. And other than that, they also provide tax consultation to the users, which is an incredible feature. And Doula simplifies the process of establishing and managing a US company, and especially for founders that are not in the US. And regardless of where they live, you can get your company registered with Doula.com. To check out Doula, go to doula.com/exerton. That is DOOLA.com/EXERTON.
Hey Nate, how are you? Hope you're doing well.
Good to connect with you.
Let's start with who is Nate? Who are you?
Who am I? I've always been drawn to ideas that had the potential for significant impact. I'll go to my background. I'm in Dallas. I'm married. I have 5 kids. Just had my 5th kid about a month ago. Christian. That's always shaped what I've done, but particularly shapes what I do now that I'm in a domain where I'm really focused on ideas and on realizing particular ideas and vision. And I've always been drawn to the potential for, you could say, ideas-driven impact, and that's sort of one way to put it. It's impact. It's the asymmetric trade. It's the non-consensus trade that offers asymmetric impact. Coming from a business perspective, now I'm doing it in a more entrepreneurial space, but it's certainly it's something where something about the thesis itself is non-consensus, and as a result, particularly meaningful if I'm right about it. It's sort of a harder path, but it's a path that offers outsized, ideally financial return and impact. So that's really the essence of what I'm drawn to. I'm doing that right now, particularly in a space that intersects with politics, where I think that politics in the broad sense is this question of how we live together and the shape of society, the way Aristotle talks about it. And I think there's particular visions I have, visions I share with a lot of people for what sort of world we want to live in, and what sort of world I think a lot of other people are drawn to. And I am focused on entrepreneurial or venture-based efforts that can help realize that.
So if we talk specifically about politics, you talked about Aristotle there too. To you, what do you think is politics?
A lot of people think of politics and they think specifically of sort of partisan questions, the sort of things Republicans and Democrats debate. That's the ground level politics. But politics in the broad sense is this question of how we live together in a society, what we aim for, what way of life we are aiming for, what a common good would be. Because you can operate as an autonomous individual to some extent, and increasingly I think there's opportunities for certain people to do that. But that's not how people are made to live. That's certainly not how most people naturally live. Most people don't have any option but to live together in communities, and I don't think it's good to. So then the question is, if we're living together in communities, how do we organize ourselves? What are the rules? What are the vision? What are the norms? I think it encompasses everything from formal governance all the way to norms and values in a society. And those are things that it's easy to sort of focus on the specific debates among Republicans and Democrats or whatever, if you have a shared framework for most of those. I think part of the reason people say our political system is in some sense broken down, I don't know if it's a question of broken down, but we're confronting some major debates, some really sharply different visions for what it even means, what America even means, what our desired direction and vision is. And those are fundamentally political questions. So right now we're in a world where in some sense the sort of fundamental broad political questions are up for grabs. And that shapes, that can impact anything. That can impact the question of what type of technology you would build, what you try to even use technology to do, how you would govern that technology or those platforms, what the algorithms would elevate or deprecate, all the way to questions of conventional political laws and policies and governance and aims. So it touches everything. It can touch everything. I think many people don't think about how politics touches everything, and to some extent, that is the problem we're trying to solve.
You talk about it touches everything, but some people, some founders specifically, they stay out of it or try to stay out of it. Do you think that is that possible?
I don't know. I don't think it's possible. I think it's impossible to stay out of politics. There's certain types. There's people who don't want to think about politics. There's people who would say they try to stay out of politics. And what that often means is that just means sort of going along with the dominant values. So if you don't want to be political, if they don't want, what that often means is they don't want political conflict. In that case, that typically means you just accept the dominant values in the space. An alternative is you have people who sort of expressly reject politics of sorts, and you see, and Brian Armstrong is often used as an example of this at Coinbase. But Brian Armstrong, I think a point I would make is Brian Armstrong did not reject politics. Brian Armstrong specifically in that Coinbase memo, he actually said, our politics are our mission. So it's not that there's no politics at Coinbase. There's no focus on political debates that aren't part of our mission. But our mission includes this broad crypto movement, this embrace, this growth of Bitcoin, this growth of crypto. And that's, I think, a very different vision. That's a recognition that you can't avoid politics, but you're going to focus on a particular set of values and a particular vision, a particular aspect of politics, or even a particular political vision. I think that's realistic. I think staying out of politics really just means operating within an existing political paradigm. It's sort of a norm that most founders have tried to embrace. It seemed viable back when there seemed to be a general consensus. We're just going to try to make money, and we're just going to try to we'll follow the social norms that are the dominant social norms. But at a time of sharp division, sharp political conflict like we're seeing now, that's not really that's not an option. I think people are recognizing they have no choice, and that includes the demands of the left, which are, I would say, revolutionary demands, which come into sharp tension often with actually making with building a great business. So increasingly, you had founders who were forced to take a stand on any number. They were demanded by employees, by journalists, by whoever, that they take a stand on a number of issues. And taking a stand on those issues that felt like they were outside of their business makes clear that the left, the sort of, in a sense, the sort of paradigm they had generally aligned with, because it's the default, was now demanding something of them that went beyond just running their business the way they wanted to run their business. Now, many have given into that, but clearly that's not a sort of abandonment of politics. That's just a going along with an increasingly demanding political agenda. I think you see the same thing in China, where in China, you might have had a lot of founders who don't really want to think about politics, but they don't have a choice when the CCP will put a party commissar on your board, for instance. Effectively, we have the same thing here. There's no avoiding it. And so then the question just becomes, are you going to go along with the dominant one? Maybe in China, you have very little choice. In the US, I think it's a lot of social pressure to do the same thing. Or are you going to consciously fork in a different direction? Whether it be like Coinbase, very specifically around something very specific to the sort of product and mission of the company, or in the case of some of what we're doing, whether it be around a sort of broadly differentiated and more holistic vision for the country and for society and for where the companies we're building fit in with that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just from what I have noticed. A lot of these things start to come into play as the company scales. So is this really important at the early stage?
I would say it depends on the company. It to some extent, it comes into focus as the company scales, because that's when you start getting demands to take a particular stand. So that's when the journalists start writing a story. But you notice Coinbase was forced into this, and I believe about 5 or 10% of their workforce ended up leaving as a result of this. So had they taken that stand sooner, it's entirely possible it would have been a lot less disruptive. So I think we're in a world where you're going to be forced to take a stand on this. And to some extent, at the very beginning, it's useful in a world where you know you're going to be confronted with some hard decisions in the future. It's useful to have a set of values that will shape the organization, to prepare the organization for that, so you can stand as one as an organization when that comes, rather than essentially have to sort of split the organization or sever part of the organization to make the decision you want. So part of it is you can sort of lay low and avoid this for a while, but you're doing things like hiring people who aren't necessarily going to share your vision on what's going to become a fundamental divisive question. Secondly, ultimately, what you choose to build. I mean, this is a key point about venture. You're building the future. You're building a different vision of the future. In many ways, what a startup is envisioning something that could exist, that the founder believes should exist, that doesn't exist. That is, in many ways, a fundamentally political question. Now, a lot of times it's sort of pretty straightforward. Like, it's just a sort of mundane. If you're just making widgets of some sort, those may be relatively marginal questions. If you're building a platform designed to shape how people interact in fundamental ways, there may be a more fundamentally political question. If you're building, let's say, certain AI tools where you have ambitious visions of how AI is going to work with or replace certain human functions, some of the questions that I think we would recognize as political questions around sort of the essence of humanity, the essence of the life we aspire to, are pretty central to the product itself. So there are significant cases where the question around what you're going to build in the first place is fundamentally political. And I would argue Bitcoin fits in that category. I mean, Bitcoin from the very beginning was created as something that was an alternative to the US dollar, with some very strong, very Austrian economic ideas around what constituted sound money. That is and the sort of good of censorship resistance. I mean, is censorship resistance a good thing? That itself is a fundamentally political question. So when you're building certain technologies, sometimes the sort of key questions about the technology itself are inherently political. And those are the ones that I find interesting. Those are the ones in many ways that we lean into, are questions where the product itself, at its very essence, has a perspective, and it's a potentially controversial perspective around where the world should go, what type of world we want to live in. And if you're taking a stand on those that reflects a set of values that are desired by a lot of people but maybe underserved in the market, you're making a bet that you can build a business that will appeal to a different sort of people, and that's a political bet at the core of the entrepreneurial decision itself.
The way you look at something, I think, shapes how it feels to you. And so this is just, I'm just pushing back a little bit. So feel free to disagree or anything. But if you look at something from a political perspective, then you start finding things that are political in it that makes it sort of get involved in politics. How does that differentiate from things that are inherently political?
There's a political aspect to a wide range of things.
Yeah.
But in many cases, there might not be sharp disagreement. I mean, if it's something like if you're running a construction company and your goal is just to build good quality houses, there's a certain vision of society where quality is prioritized, and you could argue that's somewhat political. But by and large, I think most people probably want that. So it's not... If there's a general consensus around something, if most people agree on something, then you don't have to think of it as political. You're just executing within a sort of agreed upon framework. The ones that are sort of more where you're looking at the political lens is where you're looking at something, you're saying, this is a value. I'm valuing something, or I'm seeking a particular outcome that is the subject of meaningful political debate or political disagreement. Or it's something that should be valued, and I'm going to use this company as a platform to sort of proselytize the value of something that we're offering that maybe people don't recognize as widely as important, but they should. So you're going out and you're putting out a message that includes a political appeal. This is in America's interest. This is in our society's interest. Now, your product, for it to be a successful business, your product probably has to be something that solves an actual need that the marketplace recognizes, but it may be that part of the process of selling the market, selling your customer base on the importance of what you're doing includes an element that would be recognized as political. So it can be everything from sort of a platform to sell you're using as a platform to sell a particular vision to people, which includes selling them on the importance of something, and that's something that someone who's consciously political is likely to do and is likely to focus on. Someone who's not they might be more likely to sort of take the market as it is, or does not be focused on the political lens. I mean, they might just be selling it from purely the perspective of you're going to make more money if you do this, and you sell people on why it's a better way of doing it, but you don't think about the political aspect. And that may mean that there's not a significant sort of political debate over whether that's a better vision, and it may be a more straightforward economic sales pitch. This is going to make you more money.
Do you think was Brian Armstrong, when he started Coinbase, was he consciously political, or was he made to be political?
So in some sense, most people in the crypto and the Bitcoin space recognize that what they were doing was political in a sense. It was a space that arose with a very political culture. Now, at the same time, I think that they may have focused on certain aspects of it, but not necessarily recognized that there were broad cultural divisions and broad, sharp divisions that came down to the values of their employees, wokeness, and other things that were also necessary questions to answer, that were also tied in with that potentially. So they may have sort of underestimated the political aspect of it, or recognized there were certain political questions they were taking a stand on, but not appreciated other political questions. I think that's very possible, and that could explain why it wasn't until years in that they took a stand on particular things that became hot button ones. I think it's unlikely, though, that you start a Bitcoin company, and I forget when Armstrong started, I think it was around 2015. I think it's unlikely that you start a company like that without recognizing that there's at least some political element to it.
A lot of founders, I'll say, in relation to this point, like Brian, I'll say Elon Musk too, all these founders, they're smart enough to understand that taking a particular stance will get them some hate. So why do they still take that stance?
I think it's some people want to be popular. They're typically going to go along with whatever is going to minimize their pain, minimize people disliking them. First of all, by and large, that personality is predominant among people. Like, it's very popular with, I think, MBAs and a lot of professionals. By nature, those people tend to be more agreeable. They don't want to be unpopular. I think that's a less common trait among founders, period. Founders by nature are people who don't mind taking a position that is unconventional. They're going for something new. So I think for founders, it's there's something inherently disagreeable about founding a company, especially founding a sort of entrepreneurial startup. Now, that's a little different when it's sort of very trendy and popular to found these companies. It's almost like you don't need to be the same sort of risk taker. But I think a lot of founders by nature are more willing to, they're less uncomfortable being unpopular or doing something that's unpopular. Now, at the same time, founders are dependent, and they're often particularly vulnerable because they're founders of a lot of companies, especially venture-backed companies that are not cash flowing, are dependent on access to capital, on access to customers, partnerships, employees. And so that can create a risk aversion, or that can create a sort of vulnerability or a set of risks that become more significant for the company, and they make the company more vulnerable. That creates a counterbalance where I think you'll see a lot of founders who, whether they agree with it or not, are likely to want to put their head down and avoid political conflict because they recognize the threat that conflict could pose to their company. Secondly, I think you do have a lot of founders who truly are progressive or left-leaning in their ideology. And part of that is the left has offered, for a long time, the left has offered a vision of progress, of something aspirational and forward. And founders are drawn to that. They're not envisioning an entire new world, but they're envisioning, they're the sort of people who want to be part of building something that's significant and that's going to change things. If the left offers a vision that broadly they encourage people to aspire to and help build, that will draw a certain type of person. If the right is limited in its values to conservatism, just sort of preserving the best things of the past, that tends not to be as appealing to entrepreneurial people who by their very nature are looking to go further, to do something different. I think that what the right should do is the right needs to have an alternative positive vision that we aspire to. And that's really central to what I'm doing at New Founding, is how do we develop an alternative positive vision for society, for America, and offer founders the ability to play a role in building that. They're gonna build a particular business, a particular vertical, but they can do that as part of a broader movement. It's lonely to be a founder. As a founder, you want to be part of a broader movement in many cases. And so I think some gravitate towards sort of conventional ideas of progress so they can play a part in a broader trend. We need to offer them something attractive that they can be a part of.
Why does the government's idea of progressiveness differ from founders? I mean, because a lot of founders don't agree. Yeah.
Well, I think the government itself is just a reflection. The government is many different people. The sort of people who populate government often have a different set of values than founders have. But I think you'll see a range of different views among government officials. To some extent, I think founding a company offers one. You're working in a particular space. You have a particular canvas on which you can focus on a particular vision of where things should go. Government officials have different levers. They have different things they have the ability to change. So they're going to, at the very least, often focus on different things. You're also going to see a sort of world where people in government are going to emphasize things that play a larger role for government because people like to, I think they're instinctively drawn toward ideas and visions that make their function more important. And entrepreneurial founders are going to focus on visions where people like them play a larger role in shaping the future. So I think that can account for some differences, but really I think the difference is less sort of government versus founders and probably more between people of different value systems, different ideologies, different parties. I mean, our society is divided more than anything. And I think founders in many ways are going to have to choose which side they're going to be a part of, what side they're going to help, what vision of America they're going to help create, and who they're going to partner with along the way, who's going to be their tribe, their alliance that they align with as they build that, people they hire, people they do business with, people they take capital from.
How does the belief that founders have the path that they choose, does that how is that different from the vision that the company has and the path that the company has to go, where the founder wants to take it, if that makes sense?
Well, the founder ultimately needs to be governed by reality of the company. So if you want a successful business, you need to be grounded in what works for the organization, which becomes a broader set of considerations. You now have organizational dependencies, you have alliances. Many of those are chosen. Some of those are some of those are the product of conscious choices you make based on who you choose to associate with when you have multiple options. In many cases, the market leaves you relatively few options. And so you need to choose, which can create a sort of a constrained array of options for an institution that forces more compromise, which is the essence of politics. Politics is about compromise between people who may have different priorities. And a founder leading an organization now has to act on behalf of the organization rather than purely what he might personally be interested in.
Do you think, in relation to what you talked about, do you think they're like this, mainly the side said this, the ideologies are like left versus right, and both criticize each other? Left says that the right should not exist and the right says that left should not exist. Do you think inherently, do you really want a world in which only one kind of ideology exists?
Well, so I think there's multiple axes of debate. I would say the left fundamentally, and I wrote about this in my letter, the left fundamentally is defined by certain radical ideologies that I believe are constitute a rejection of the natural order and the rejection of human nature. You could argue that there's sort of a utopianism inherent in left-wing thinking. I think that is fundamentally wrong, and it should not exist. The world would be better if the world would be better if wrong ideas disappeared. Now, I think there's a separate axis of debate, which is, in some sense, sort of conservatism versus change. And I think that's where you want to see productive debate. You can have multiple visions that are all grounded in reality that are competing. So I think it's fine to have multiple competing visions. I think there's sort of valid cases to be made for extremely ambitious technological visions. There's sort of ambitious visions for how we could live together as a community that are different from where we currently live. To the extent that those remain grounded in reality, which I would argue is limited to the right in a world where the left is by nature radical and utopian. It's good to have competition. It's good to have certainly differences. At the very least, I think it's good that different societies have different sets of norms and values that they preserve, and they have different sorts of visions that they aspire to. I mean, America and France should agree on a lot. There's a lot of things that are just objective reality that would be good if they agreed on, but it'd also be good if they maintain certain distinctions that reflect good things that might be good cultural elements that are relative emphases of theirs. Secondly, anytime you're promoting a movement toward a vision, there's a risk associated with that. There's a cost associated with change. And so it's good to have a conservative impulse that protects against anything that's too radical of a change when you're talking about things at the societal level. So I think that, again, you should have a debate between sort of the conservative forces that are trying to protect things and people, even no matter how good and positive their vision is, trying to change things. You may have a positive vision for how we could build. Let's say you're talking about a town. You have a town that is a community of people, and you have a positive vision for how we can grow and improve this town. Nonetheless, you don't want to just raise the town and sort of try to rebuild a new utopian town or even sort of a new better town theoretically overnight. That just doesn't work. That's not how things work with human relations. So it's good to have a conservative impulse that protects things, that protects norms, community fabric from change that might be too rapid. So those debates are good debates. Those are debates that should happen. We want to see a diversity of those. What we don't want is we don't want bad ideas. There's no value to having bad ideas or wrong ideas in the mix there. I think it's a question of lots of debates over prudence, but they should all remain anchored to reality.
What do you think classifies as a bad idea?
I mean, I think radical liberty, to go to, since I used the left as an example of this, radical liberation, the idea that we should reject all unchosen bonds, the idea that you as an autonomous individual should be by default totally free of bonds. No, there's no, you have no obligation to your parents. You have no sort of family ties. You are just an individual. That is a radical idea that detaches people from the context in which they naturally exist, which is a context in which you are part of a family. And as a result, you may not have chosen the family you're a part of. You may not agree with every one of their values, and yet you do retain duties to your family, duties to parents. Certainly a sort of natural, should have a sort of natural preference for them, not entirely based on your choice. Even more so, your reality, your biological reality. If you're a man, whether you choose to live as a man or a woman is not a subject of choice. One is grounded in reality. The other is fundamentally a transhuman rejection of reality. Ideas that are at war with the nature of reality are fundamentally bad ideas. Technology increasingly may seem to give us the power to achieve things, to free ourselves from reality itself. And then I would say another one is sort of a radical leveling, a radical egalitarianism, the idea that that all differences are bad, and we need to engineer away any differences in outcome in society. That's been the essence of left-wing ideology since its origin, and you've had utopia, you've had leveling movements for over a millennium, and that's an idea that is it's utopian, and it is in conflict with the nature of reality, where different people have differences, different societies have differences, there are different outcomes, and it's impossible to engineer those away.
Aren't most founders sort of bending reality, or most entrepreneurs are bending reality rather than?
Yes, very much so. That's why I say it's inherently political. You are bending reality to a vision you have in mind. The question is that vision, for the sake of your business, you should want that vision to be grounded in reality. But secondly, that should also be grounded in what is good. So you can bend reality to an outcome that is good. You can bend reality to an outcome that is bad. If you put a lot of effort into bending reality to an outcome that is bad, you may be successful, but that's a bad outcome. I mean, it's not that different than many rulers, kings, conquerors, where they bend reality. They conquer a neighboring kingdom. That is changing reality. Was it good or bad is a question that has profound importance for whether they did something good or bad for the world, whether they bent reality in a good or bad way. And for that, you need a standard of good and bad.
You have a specific way as with you view progress. Your specific ideology. I personally, I don't think that no two people can have the same ideology. I think that's what I think. I mean, everyone takes some part of left, some parts of right, and create what's perfect for them. How do you think when raising money as a founder, or when fundraising, how does that correlate with the fund that you're raising from, the firm that you're raising?
Well, so I think you want to, in every relationship you invest in, you want to know. No one has a perfect. No one is going to agree on everything, and that's, again, it goes to the question of politics. Like, even if people had a fully, even if they shared the same moral foundation, they have different priorities. Go into the sort of point about families. If you had two different, if you have your family and the investor has their family, they have certain priorities related to what they're trying to achieve, to their personal interest, to their family interest, etc. You have certain priorities related to yours. Ultimately, a partnership comes down to, do we agree on the important things? Do we agree on the important values here? Do we agree on the important standards? Do we agree on ethics? What constitutes honesty? What are our expectations of each other? And I think part of a good partnership is one where there's agreement on the essential points. Now, in a society where there's broad political agreement, you may not think about the political points, and you may just sort of assume agreement on those, and then get to sort of key aspects of economic partnership. Do we agree on return horizon, on sort of how long the money is going to be invested, what type of returns we're seeking, how we're going to get liquidity? In a society where there's pretty sharp divisions around direction for society, around politics, around major ethical questions related to politics, you want to make sure you have agreement on those as well. Or at least you want to make sure you have very, very clear guidelines for how to handle areas where you may disagree around those. Because being in a partnership with people where there's sharp disagreement on fundamental points related to that partnership is not a productive partnership. And taking money from an investor is a key. Now, it could be that you recognize that we have pretty sharp disagreements on some of these, but the investor agrees that we'll defer to you as the founder. Founders Fund has a reputation for this, where they ultimately are extremely founder deferential. So regardless of their particular viewpoints, they'll probably defer to the founder, and that can be a productive partnership. In a sense, their norm, the rules of the road in that partnership, include the fact that they're seeking a big return by betting on the founder's ability to achieve a meaningful vision, and they'll not seek to impose their values, their politics. That works to an extent. I think that you reach a point where divisions can be large enough that is not enough. It's certainly, the more you agree on in view of the world and in vision for the world, the more likely that is to be a productive partnership.
Wouldn't that some venture funds that set this differential as to the type of the sort of person or viewpoint that they're looking for? Do they tend to lose on deals that could be potentially very progressive for that certain fund?
Well, so part of it is you may lose on deals, you may also gain on deals. I mean, ultimately, as a venture fund, it's more important. You're not going to be competitive for every deal, and trying to be competitive for every deal is a recipe for failure. We unapologetically take a right-wing vision as a core part of our defining traits. So the deals we're looking for are deals where founders value that and seek that out. And that makes us very attractive to founders who recognize that their viewpoint is a minority viewpoint in Silicon Valley among venture funds. They want founders who align with them. Yes, I'm sure we would lose on a lot of founders who don't share our values. At the same time, you build a successful venture fund around a set of good investments rather than it's about you could do only 1 out of 100 investments. You could do even only 1 out of 100 good companies, and you still can build a great fund that way. You want to be differentiated. I think that on the left, where the predominant value system aligns generally with the left, I think increasingly you are seeing situations where certain funds are losing founders. We actually have a situation where a founder let us in on a competitive deal specifically because they liked our values alignment and our unapologetic public message around that. And they valued that over a firm that was a much better established, much better known firm that didn't share those values. So yes, for increasingly, I think you will find that there's an array of founders, many of whom recognize the political aspect. They recognize that they want to be somewhere on the right related to that, and they will reject investors as partners who are who have signaled that who have not signaled that they share those values or have actively signaled other values. So there's a cost to taking both ways. There's a cost to taking a political position. It makes you open to some partners, and it closes you off to others.
Do you think founders today really have that leeway to do that?
It depends. I mean, ultimately, no one needs to found a company at all. So if you're a founder, it's often better not to found a company or don't found a company that requires significant outside capital. I mean, the default choice for most people building a business should be to build a business that does not require outside capital or does not require significant outside capital. Most people should not be building venture-backed businesses. Venture-backed businesses are a partnership to achieve a very ambitious future. That is not, certainly it's not the best path to a good lifestyle. So if you're looking to just earn good money and support your family, it's almost never the easiest path. So if you're going to take that choice, I would say you always have the choice of whether you're going to take that venture-backed founder path, period. Once you take that path, you may have a constrained array of options. I may say, in many cases, it would be better not to take that path unless you're going to be able to find investors. And why enter into a partnership, period, with people who don't share your values, or people who are going to seriously and meaningfully conflict with your values, assuming you are successful? That's not going to be a happy partnership. It's better not to enter into a partnership than to enter into a partnership you know is going to be an unhappy partnership. So yes, people have a choice. Increasingly, they recognize that too. Increasingly, I think one of the reasons people move in the direction of business ownership itself is they're looking for a higher degree of independence than they could get, let's say, working at Google or working at a big firm. So if they're going to make that choice in the first place, if you just want to put your head down, try to avoid conflict, try to get money, try to earn a good living, it's better to do that in a situation where you also have less to lose if you walk away, which could be just a well-paying job at a big company. If you're going to choose to go in to a multi-year venture where you're starting a company where you're putting your heart and soul into something, then I would say you should be very cognizant of the values. And that could be everything from the political values to just the timeline on the prioritization of what sort of return outcome we would accept. I mean, some venture capitalists will want to take a sort of roll the dice to go for the multi-billion-dollar outcome rather than accepting the $100 million outcome. The $100 million outcome would be enough to change the founder's life, but it's not enough to be as interesting to the venture capital firm. That's another example of you want alignment on those important things. Do you have the luxury once you're down the path of founding a company and you need money? You may not. You may need to make practical compromises, just as political leaders need to make practical compromises given their geopolitical situation all the time. So I think it's not something you got to deal with the reality of the world that you're in, and you got to make compromises on that basis. At the very least, you should be cognizant of what you're dealing with and what the risks and costs of the decisions you're making are.
You talked about the ideologies in partnerships. Do you think in a partnership, ideologies change over time from either of the sides?
I mean, they certainly can. People do change. I think it depends on how firmly anchored people's values are, and it also depends on some extent the skin in the game they've taken. So if you have a firm where the founders have taken risks to demonstrate, if they've taken risks to demonstrate differentiated values, those are less likely to change. I mean, there's skin in the game. There's skin in the game there showing a commitment to a set of values. Those don't necessarily change. Even if one of the partners' personal beliefs did change, the firm itself now has a set of values that they're sort of committed to. Founders, again, their values may well change, especially younger founders. people mature, their values develop as they mature. That should be expected. Certainly, I think through people's 20s, there's often a lot of sort of development of values. At the same time, I think if you're anchored to sort of core visions, this is why I don't really like ideology. Ideology tends to be a sort of abstract framework applied to the real world. If you have values, if the values you're anchored to are timeless, true values, they shouldn't change. Your ideas of how to prudently apply those will likely change and evolve over time, but those can be pragmatically worked through.
I think this has been incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this. And one question which I like to end with, I've been like into startups, VCs, and all these things since I was like 11. What do you think is one fact that would blow 11-year-old me mind?
It's a good question. It's. I think the thing that I emphasize is the digital world is growing to be effectively another level of government. So a lot of people think of government as sort of there's a federal government, there's a state government, there's a local government. They sort of understand those are all layers of government. I would say the digital platforms or the digital networks that we operate in effectively are another level of government. It may not blow your mind at all. It may be something that's taken for granted for someone who grew up in the digital age. But in many ways, this is why I think the intersection is particularly important. When Elon Musk took over Twitter, that was not just a private equity deal by some guy looking to financially engineer something to make more money. That was much more akin to one feudal lord capturing a strategic domain that now is going to give him substantial political power over something that affected the sort of geopolitical landscape. That, I think, is the domain. I'm willing to bet that is going to be one of the most important domains for political fight. So in many ways, for people who are interested in startups, this is actually, it can be as impactful of a path as going to be a congressman or something. Like, I think it's not an either or. It's not like you either go into business and startups or you go into politics. Or going and focusing on questions of governance of the tech world, of the shape of these powerful digital networks, is itself an avenue for the statesmanship of the digital age.
I mean, that blew 15-year-old me mind. I think other than that's it from my side. Anything you'd like to say?
That's it's great to be here, great to talk. Certainly anyone interested in what I'm doing, very active on Twitter, which I think is how you found me. Reached out there. So spent a lot of time talking about these subjects, and I think always interested in visions and ideas that reflect what we are thinking about here.